Good evening, and thanks first
Buenas
to the
tardes y
organizers
primero que nada
who have
gracias a los
who have
organizadores
invited me to this very stimulating conference. Second point, please excuse my poor English and my terrible French accent. I'm going to address one aspect of the cost of growth, of techno-economic growth. This morning, Miguel Valencia said that technoscientific development results in the devastation of symbolic and cultural resources, and that will be my topic. And I shall address this topic from a narrow point of view. How does technoscientific and technological development destroys some cultural resources linked with non-monetary resources? And there is a close connection between both non-monetary economy and symbolic resources and cultural resources. I have observed through my work that the development of technology and industry results in new forms of poverty and misery in affluent industrial society. I mean, France is a rich country. And we are facing new types of poverty and new types of misery, which is worse. And there are because of some socially and culturally disorganizing consequences of the technologization of modern life. And I address this issue from two theoretical points of view. First, I borrowed from Jacques Ellul the idea that technology is a desymbolizing power. It destroys. Rapid development has a destructive impact on tradition and more generally on culture, which is essentially symbolic. Now, and then there is a second idea which I borrowed from Ivan Illich, who thought that one of the conditions of modernization and of the rise of industrial society, of the commodization of resources and of the professionalization of work, one of the conditions is the destruction of popular, what he calls vernacular cultures. Now, of course, those two ideas are converging. They are not contradictory. Ellul insists more on the structural impact of technology on culture. Illich insists more on the political dimensions in terms of dominance of certain groups over other groups. And I think I shall insist more in an Ellulian way on the structural and non-political approach to this idea of the destruction of of the vernacular culture and resources which result from the technologization of life. Now, for many years, I have studied the issue of poverty in contemporary France, whereas in many other developed countries, a great number of households becomes and remains dependent on public welfare program and private relief organization. Now, most standard economic and sociological studies of poverty are focused on the social relationship which condition the access of various categories of households to monetary resources. People are poor because they don't have access to sufficient monetary resources. Now, this approach is perhaps necessary, but it is not sufficient, because monetary resources are not the only one which contributes to the social integration of individuals and households and which contribute to their well-being. For most of us who live in developed countries, our way of life, of daily life, the mode de vie quotidien, remains dependent on our ability to master informal and non-monetary resources, such as do-it-yourself, skills, gifts, and exchange of services and commodities. Now, I remind you from a purely quantitative point of view that the domestic and non-monetary economy is still very important, even in a developed country. Now, 20 years ago, it was estimated that the French would devote 41 billion hours every year to paid work and 48 billion hours to domestic and community unpaid work. And the French historian Fernand Braudel used to speak of the economy of the ground floor, the économie du rez-de-chaussée, in order to describe the importance of this non-monetary economy. From a qualitative point of view, this non-monetary or vernacular economy is very important, since activities that belong to domestic and communal economy provide the basis for the transmission of behavior patterns, of know-how, of norms and values. This is where primary socialization takes place. This ground floor of civilization is of a crucial importance for the construction of both the social bond and of the autonomous and responsible individuals. But it is usually neglected by economists and sociologists. Most of them consider that this informal economy, non-monetary economy, should naturally decline, and that such a decline is a normal consequence of the process of modernization and a good opportunity, besides, for creating new professions and new jobs. But from a more anthropological point of view, we might fear that an attenuation of the sphere of non-monetary production and non-monetary exchange might result in serious educational regression and also in the weakening of the integrative capacity of social life. Now, we should not forget that man is a symbolic animal. And it's not a very original statement. I mean, many people have said that before. And it has been said here, it has been said by philosophers for a long time. I just remind you of the books of Ernst Cassirer, who talk about the philosophy of symbolic forms as an essential dimension of human being in the world. Now, symbols are very essential for man modes of existing. Symbols and their relationship give rise to norms which powerfully influence our mind. They produce a network of subjective and intersubjective forces. They stimulate emotions. And it is true that symbols, through excessive emotional attachment, for example in religious bigotry or political fanaticism, can become oppressive and should be sometimes rejected or criticized. But we should not forget that symbols provide us with an inner space of freedom. Symbols are the condition of freedom. Humans can choose, they can make choices only because they can consider symbolically several possibilities that have different meanings and values. That the symbolic capacity is at the basis of freedom. Now, these symbols also mediate between humans and themselves, their impulse, their desire, their actions, as well as between themselves and other humans. And symbolization can be emancipatory in two respects, with respect to oneself and with respect to others. We need symbolic mediation and the transmission and interiorization of value, and for the capacities, for example, of relating to authorities which represent limits and requirements, and which make a possibility for learning rules and being able to give to oneself some limits. And it is clear that before they can be educated by a formal education, through an educational process consciously organized, children must have been previously civilized by an informal educational process, which provides the implicit foundation for any explicit educational activity. Now, we could mention, for example, the capacity of controlling our own body, for mastering time, the ability for communicating, for emotional self-discipline, and for the acceptance of a common law. All this is achieved through the internalization of symbolic patterns. At the second level, there is also the informal process of learning how to participate in symbolic patterns of behavior and collective action, by which we acquire many of these capacity. This process of informal learning are quite complex and interrelated. They operate at diverse levels of interactivity. I can just give you a few examples of symbolic, the acquisition of symbolic patterns through these activities. Now, the rules of language and combination of signs, the codes of bodily posture, ritual, dance, songs, lullabies, games, also, and so on, which facilitate the sharing and the transmission of experience. For example, how to control the experience of loss or of sexual desire. We learn that very early, through some kind of symbolic rituals. And we don't know that we learn it, which is very important. We learn it without knowing that we learn. Also, all these codes and etiquette of savoir-vivre, which allows a kind of pacific interaction between humans. Modes of also relationship with non-human life, whether animals or vegetables, which contribute to the understanding of oneself and others. Rules for giving gifts and rules for symbolic exchange. Rules for sexual exchange. models of coexistence with different circles of reciprocity, from the nuclear family to the extended family, kinship, clans, village, and so on. All this is organized through symbolic patterns, which are informally transmitted and acquired. And also the informal learning of certain character traits. The reproduction of this symbolic capital depends very much on the vitality of non-monetary economy and community life, which is essential. We should always keep in mind that symbolic resources are not easily renewable. They can be quickly destroyed, which is the experience which we do all the time, but the reconstruction of all this capital of symbolic patterns takes time. It's very slow. Of course, we discover that many of our vital natural environmental resources are non-renewable or very slowly renewable. And degrowth movement is very much focused on this environmental dimension of the limits of growth, of the devastation caused by technological and economic growth. But we should always keep in mind that we are witnessing a very quick devastation of symbolic and cultural resources. And as a result of the destruction of these subtle processes that organize human life, both at the individual and the collective level, and which are very fragile, for many people, the informal process of transmission and incorporation of social and practical knowledge are less and less efficient, if I may say. I shall very quickly mention, for example, the erosion of civility, of being capable to interact in a peaceful way with other people. This is something which we can observe all the time. Right? I mean, developed countries are countries where there is a lot of prisons. And most of the people who are in prison are not there for big crimes, but there is a huge production of incivilities. So the erosion of civility, the loss, something which I've been observing as a sociologist in France, the loss of dwelling skills. It's just an example. Many people today have no introduction to the know-how and the behavior that allow us to dwell somewhere. And we can see that other people who once possessed those capacities have lost them. And as a result, many lodgings are not properly maintained, and some housing units are so neglected and dilapidated that they must be destroyed. On a big scale, this can be observed. And third example, the rise of nutritional disorders. In many affluent industrial societies, an increasing number of adults do not know how to feed themselves and how to feed their children. And as a result, we have a very scary increase of obesity, diabetes, which spoils the life of countless individuals. Now, a few words about the context of this weakening of the symbolic resources. I shall mention three aspects. First, the acceleration, which is a result of technological change. Accelerated change in all aspects of life, and which has for consequence the disqualification of tradition and a great difficulty of creating new traditions. Now, for example, in the mid-19th century, in a new industrial context, the working class in Europe tried to develop its own culture and to create new traditions. But they had no time to succeed because technological change was too fast. They were outpaced by technological change. So this attempt at creating a new working class culture failed, basically. It's no longer valid today. Second aspect, the monetarization and commodification of economic life erodes the importance of non-monetary relationship, and so many philosophers have said that the creation of monetary relationship has an emancipatory aspect. If I make some money, I owe nothing to the others. I'm getting some independence. And that's a very powerful drive from moving from the countryside to the cities. Independence. But we should not be blinded to the fact that these non-monetary relationships are very important, allow some very important socializing and symbolic process, and a complete devitalization of this non-monetary economic sphere will result in the destruction of our social symbolic capital. Karl Marx mentioned the impact of technology and industrialization and the impact of capital, which constantly displaces the symbolic norms that regulate the relationship between human beings. This is not a new idea. But not only money is a powerful agent for de-symbolizing life, because everything can be bought and obtained with money. So you don't need symbolic norms. But also technoscience as itself is a powerful agent of de-symbolization. The unfolding of the operative power contributes to the weakening of symbolic values. Like money, technology is a powerful social operator that tends to free itself from symbolic limits and constraints. And we see that, for example, symbolic norms, ethical norms are constantly displaced by technological advance. often give the example of the techniques which may interfere with human reproduction, sexual reproduction. Contraception and all this technology which have been following, we see that first people say, oh no, we should not do that. And then one generation later, well, it's okay, there is no problem. We see that the advance of technology is transforming. I'm not saying whether it's for better or for worse, but it has the power of transforming our norms. There is, in the world of science and technology, values have no place. Nothing is untouchable. Everything can be acted upon and modified by a calculus. How many minutes? I'm over? 1 minute? Okay. So we see that in, for example, considering the know-how of daily life, how to eat, how to make food, how to dwell in a lodging, in a housing unit, and so on. People, in a context of rapid socio-technical change, people are losing their ability of organizing their behavior and also their capacity to transmit it. Traditional ways of transmission do not work anymore for more and more people. And this is going to be probably worse. We are just experiencing that, but it will go on. And the transmission from one generation to the next, all these very subtle processes are weakened. One of the reasons, which is an important issue, is the rhythm of innovation. And integrating new technologies, a new technological context require a slow tempo. And we are in the midst of I'm going to finish on that, of a contradiction between technological time and human time. There is a discrepancy. Technology goes fast, and eliminating time is the goal of any engineer. But that contradicts the human need for going slowly. And the result is a destruction of the symbolic order and of the capacity of transmitting values. Thank you.